The personality of Stepan Bandera has been one of the most controversial for many decades. For some he is a hero, for others he is a traitor, and for others he became a man to whom an idea was dearer than his own life. But let's take a closer look at his personality and the values of a man who, especially in our time, is beginning to be remembered more and more often. Today I will tell you why he is considered a hero of Ukraine and an enemy of Russia, what he did during the war, and how one can die for an idea. But, as always, about everything in order. Stepan Bandera was born on January 1, 1909, in Austria-Hungary, in the village Staria Ugrinov, now Ivano-Frankovsk region of Ukraine. But since Austria-Hungary fell apart after the First World War, and after the Soviet-Polish War in 1920, Stepan's birthplace became a part of Poland, so the beginning of his conscious life and personality formation took place to a greater extent in Poland. Like many others, Bandera was completely dissatisfied with the rule of the Poles, so they advocated the creation of an independent state together. 2 years later, in 1922, he created the Union of Ukrainian Nationalist Youth, which did not achieve much success, but gathered a large enough number of people who supported his ideas. And already in 1929, the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, abbreviated as OUN, appeared. It should be noted that initially Bandera in general did not make any important decisions in the UUN and was the head of the propaganda department, but then he fell the UUN march in Galicia and Bukovina, where he violently began the struggle with the Polish authorities, using as a struggle terrorist acts, the main of which was the terrorist attack in 1934, during which the Polish Interior Minister Bronislaw Paracki was killed. During the Warsaw Process, all the organizers of the terrorist attack were caught and sentenced to death, but the sentence of Stepan Bandera was changed and instead of execution he was sentenced to life imprisonment. However, Bandera was in prison until 1939, where he was saved by the beginning of the Second World War, because Germany quickly enough captured Poland and our prisoner quickly enough was at liberty. An alliance with the Germans. Stepan Bandera was a very clever man who believed sacredly in the idea of creating an independent state. It was at this point that he decided to join the Nazis and begin the fight against the USSR. His contemporaries explained that the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic could not forgive the Soviets the famine of the 1930s and the deportation of over 300,000 peasants from western Ukraine in 1939 to 1940 after the Red Army's liberation campaign. After short negotiations with the Germans, Bandera received permission to form the Legion of Ukrainian Nationalists, which included 600 people who were needed to create a base for training saboteurs, but Stepan Bandera himself was going to proclaim the establishment of the Ukrainian state on the Ukrainian lands liberated from the Bolshevik government, which, of course, the Nazis, with whom Bandera collaborated, could not even think about. The war. Even before the beginning of the Great Patriotic War, saboteurs trained in the Legion were actively transferred to the Ukrainian territory, which was part of the USSR, in order to gather as many sympathizers as possible, and well after the war began on June 22 this group began to actively engage in guerrilla and subversive warfare against the Soviets. Already on June 30, the formed Ukrainian battalion Nachtigall together with the German units entered Lviv, but then for Bandera happened unrepeatable. Yes, of course, it was a huge victory for Bandera and his associates, but one mistake cost Stepan a lot. As our hero was firmly convinced in creation of the independent state, he was burned by these thoughts and decided to hold some kind of victory parade in the occupied Lvov. It all happened, if not for one but. After the infamous July pogrom in Lviv, where thousands of Jews were killed, Bandera decided to organize a parade of his units, which marched under yellow and blue banners, but he made a serious mistake: there was no coordination of the parade with the Germans at all. From power to a concentration camp. Germans were outraged by such an impudent trick, so a few days later Stepan Bandera was detained by the German police in Lvov, and then sent to court. The court order was clear: imprisonment. It was not that Bandera accepted the year and a half of prison with respect, he most likely did not even understand why he was detained, but his subsequent fate put his ideas of creating an independent Ukraine on the line. After a year and a half in prison, Bandera was sent to the Sachsenhausen concentration camp, and his brainchild, the Ukrainian Legion, was recalled from the front and sent to maintain order in the occupied territories, where the same Legion began to conduct a very close policy to the Germans: torture, executions, destruction of all life, But there remained those OUN figures who still burned with dreams of an independent Ukraine, who in the future would go underground, where they would continue the struggle for independence, freedom without the Soviets and without the Germans. In February 1943, the long-awaited Ukrainian Insurgent Army (UPA) was formed, which at the time of its creation numbered from 10 to 30,000 fighters. At the same time, the Ukrainian nationalist organization under the leadership of Mykola Lebed launched a slogan, which actually declared war on the Soviet and German authorities, in order to achieve independence by military means. Freedom without Soviets and without Germans, this was the slogan, after which the UPA began active combat operations against German units. It was the rebel army that would be called Banderovцы, although in fact Stepan Bandera had nothing to do with this unit, because he had already been imprisoned for almost 2 years. And here we get quite an absurd situation. Both before and now Banderites are called those who fiercely fight for the independence of Ukraine in an extremely dangerous way for society, but only Bandera himself has no special involvement in this, as I have already explained above. The founder of this policy, of course, is Stepan Bandera, but the main supporter was the head of the OUN Mykola Lebed, so we have that Banderas would be more correctly called Lebed, but of course, this is only my personal opinion. The UPA fighters began actively attacking more and more German legions, thereby greatly assisting the Soviets, against whom, let me remind you, the Banderites are fighting. The Germans allocated a huge number of soldiers to the suppression of the UPA, so the losses on both sides were estimated at tens of thousands of dead, and for the head of the UUN leader Lebed was assigned a reward of 500,000 Reichsmarks, in our money it's almost 500 million rubles. The struggle against Nazis sometimes touched also peaceful inhabitants, so, for example, happened in Volhynia where almost 36,000 peace Poles became the victims of Bandera fighters. Only in March-July 1943 the Bandera members organized so-called Volyn massacre or Polish genocide, the main idea of which was to exterminate anyone who in any way tried to help the occupied Polish people, whether they were Ukrainian or Polish. Reunification with the Germans. When it became clear to the German government that the war was on the verge of defeat and the Soviets began to slowly but surely displace the Germans from right bank Ukraine, they decided to make a deal with the UPA, leaving them stores, weapons and supplies, in exchange for receiving an insurgent war against the Soviets and the transfer of intelligence. At the same time Stepan Bandera was released from the concentration camp, who, although he led the UPA, was very, very mediocre, rather than as a real commander. At the intelligence school in Krakow, the UPA, together with the Germans, prepared more and more crowds of saboteurs, who were then thrown into Soviet-controlled territories. By the way, in January 1945 Stepan Bandera again becomes the leader of the UUN, where he continues to develop a plan of independent Ukraine. However, the war continued, and when it came to the battles for western Ukraine, the UPA could offer little or no resistance to the Red Army. But it is worth recognizing that it was at the hands of the Ukrainian insurgents killed the commander of the First Ukrainian Front, General Nikolai Vatutin. Having lost the battle for Ukraine, the UPA went underground, continuing to attack Soviet troops, but on a much smaller scale. Post-war hunt for Bandera members. Killing Bandera. After winning the war, the Soviets ordered the NKVD to begin an active struggle with the underground. Things got to such a scale that sometimes they had to throw in troops with equipment to suppress the UPA. Both the NKVD and the UPA had extremely brutal methods of struggle. They took hostages, abused civilians who were thought to be involved with one or the other, and killed anyone who looked wrong. But the main gaze of the Soviets was directed at the leader of all the insurgents, Stepan Bandera, who at the time was successfully hiding in Munich with his wife and children. From the 1950s to 1959 Bandera was personally assigned a regiment of German militia as a guard, which, incidentally, repeatedly saved his life in attempts on his life. But in 1959 Bandera was killed by a syringe of potassium cyanide that was put into him by a KGB agent. Bohdan Stashinsky, the UUN leader, died in the hospital without regaining consciousness. However, the personality of Bandera remains very ambiguous. Many Ukrainians fiercely love and continue the ideas of their leader, but many hate him, mostly for his close ties with the Nazis. By the way, on January 20, 2010 the leader of Ukraine Viktor Yushchenko posthumously awarded Bandera the title of the highest degree of honor of the Hero of Ukraine for indestructibility of spirit in defense of national idea, for the heroism and self-sacrifice shown in the struggle for the independent Ukrainian state. To this day, the Ukrainian nationalists sacredly believe in the ideas of Bandera, holding marches in his honor. One thing has become absolutely clear: the name Stepan Bandera has become a nickname. So, for example, the leader of the Ukrainian party Svoboda Oleg Tyahnybok said, "Someone calls us Banderates out of spite and thinks that we are offended." Yes, we are proud of it. Subscribe to the channel and share this video with your friends. Give it a thumbs up. Tell us interesting facts you know about the topic of this video. See you in new videos.